Hi, this is Mr. Dinsmore. Today we're going to look at factoring numbers and some strategies that you can use to find factors much more efficiently. There are some things you need to know before you can use these strategies. So let's look at the things that you need to know in order to use these strategies effectively. You need to know what odd and even numbers are. You need to know how to double numbers. You need to know how to split numbers. And you need to know what factors and multiples are in the first place. If you know these things, you're ready to use these strategies. Well, we're going to be using patterns and strategies to find factors instead of just dividing numbers or knowing our math facts. These things are helpful, but those will be used last resort. So what patterns are we going to be using in strategies to find factors more efficiently? Well, the patterns and strategies we're going to use are odd and even numbers, doubling and splitting numbers, looking at numbers that end in zeros and fives, or numbers that have the same digit, like a 2 and a 2. Then if those strategies don't work, we're going to go to closest factor. And if we don't know the closest factor, we can count by that multiple until we find the factor we're looking for, or find out if it's a factor or not. I have a chart I'm going to show you here with two numbers, 13 and 18. And you can see I have my factor finding tools here, which these are the things you need to remember. Number one, always look for odd and even numbers. And based on odd and even number patterns, you're going to double or split numbers. You do that all the way through your numbers and your factors. And when you can no longer spot numbers that you can double or split, you are going to go to strategy number 3, which is looking at the endings of numbers and the digits, and then eliminating factors based on that. And then finally, when that doesn't work and you can't use the first 3 strategies, you go to the last 2, which is finding the closest factor or counting by that multiple to see if it's a factor. Always go back to 1 and 2 because that's going to save you looking for numbers you don't need to. So let's take the number 13 and 18 here. 13 is a prime number because it only has factors of 1 and itself. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that factors are the math facts that make the number. And what you're seeing is the answer to multiplication problem, which is the 13. So instead of writing 1 times 13 and 13 times 1, I'm going to be putting a comma between the two numbers so I don't have to write the multiplication fact both times. And you can see that 13 is a prime number and that using our strategies, I can determine that 13 is a prime number. And if I look over at 18, you can notice that it is an even number, so it's going to be a composite number because any even number is going to have a factor besides 1 in itself because you're always going to have a factor of 2 if it's even. So you can see by looking at these numbers with odd and even, I already know if they're going to have certain factors or not. So for example, because 13 is odd, it can only have odd factors. So I don't need to look at any factors that would be even and waste my time looking at anything that would be even when it comes to looking at the number 13. Also, the doubling and splitting idea is important because factors can never be greater than half of the number. So if I'm looking at, once I get past the 1 and the 13, my factor of 2 will split the number in half. So I can't have a factor. If you look at the 2 and 9 with 18, because 18 is even, I can split it and get a 2 and 9. So therefore, I'm not going to have a factor that is going to be greater than 9 because 9 is half of the number. So if I go over 13, I can eliminate looking for numbers like 7 or above because they are greater than half of 13. So the only numbers left for 13 to even look for would be a 3 and a 5. So I could use strategy 3, which shows that it doesn't end in a 0 or 5. So I'll take 3 and 5 off the board. And obviously the same digits are going to apply because there is no factor of 11. So like it's not like 11 or 22, which is going to have a factor of 11. So all that's left is the 3. And then that's when I can go to my strategy 4, which is looking for the closest factor or counting by 3s to get there and discover that, guess what? 3 times 4 is 12 and 3 times 5 is 15. So I'm not going to land on 13. 13 is a prime number either because there is no other factors. Now 18, if you notice when I split it, because I used the first and second strategy, I got to 2 and 9. If you notice that the 2 and 9 here, that the 9 is odd, that means there's not going to be a factor of 4, which means there's not going to be a factor of 8. and on up the 16 and the doubling pattern. So I have no reason to look for a factor of 4 with 18. And I'm going to stop at 9. And so this is important because now I can't use my odd and even strategy or my doubling and splitting, so I need to go to the other strategies and ask myself, is there a 3? Because once again, I'm not going to have any factors greater than 9. I know there's going to be no 8 because 8 is double 4. And there is no 4 because the factor of 2 is odd, so I can eliminate 4 and 8. I could look at 7, right, and say, what could I count by 7? Well, 7 times 2 is 14. Count by 7 one more. And see, now I'm using the closest factor. And once again, I'm going to go to 21, so 7's off the board. So all I have left now is 3 and 6. Well, if I look at 3 and 6, well, isn't 3 times 6 going to get me? Now I'm using my math fact to 18. Now, once again, I could count and use, if I didn't know that factor, and find the 15 and the 12 and say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to land on it. But one thing I did want to point out is, see how I wrote this 6 and 3 backwards? As soon as I got my 3 and 6, I could use my odd and even number pattern again and say, wait a second, if there's a factor of 3 that is even, there has to be a factor of 6 also. By doubling the 3, I get 6, and splitting the 6, I get 3. But then I just created the same two numbers again, so I don't need to do that. So I wouldn't even use the 6. All I need is the 3, 6, but it just shows you that the pattern's there and that it's composite. Now let's apply this strategy without looking at the numbers to a number that's a little bit trickier. So I wrote out the math facts from 1 to 12 again that we can eliminate to find our factors. And we're going to be using the number 96, which is a larger number that has a lot of factors. But it's really important on this number because you may spot some factors already if you know your math facts. But what you want to do is stick with the strategies first and keep doubling and splitting numbers based on odd and even pattern before looking for other factors. Because watch what's going to happen with the doubling and splitting strategy and odd and even strategy when it comes to 96. First of all, we know 1 and 96 is all automatically factors, right? But since this is, once again, the odd and even pattern, an even number, there has to be a factor of 2. So I cut 96 in half, and what do I get? 2 and 48. Now, before I start looking for other factors or start using any other strategies, I need to look and see that 2 and 48 are both even. That means there has to be a factor of 4. So I double my 2 to 4 and split my 48 in half and get 4 and 24. Now, if you look at this, I'm not going to go to any other strategies because I still have even numbers. I'm going back to that odd and even first strategy. Then I double and split. So I double my 4 and get my 8 factor, and 8 times 12 is 96. And you may have seen that earlier. But I'm not done because I can split again. And this is what's great, is now I'm going to find things that are not even math facts and start running into other factors by continuing to use the odd and even pattern. So let's double 8 and split 12. I get 16 and 6, which most of us don't know are 16 facts, right? And even if we know a 6 fact, we're not going to go up to finding 6 times 16, right? And so, but what's remarkable about this is I've now found a 6 factor by still using my doubling and splitting. I'm not going to start looking for any other factors or use other strategies because guess what? I'm going back to odd and even because this is still, both factors here are even. So we're going to split again. We're going to double the 16 to 32 and split the 6 to 3, and guess what? We found the factor of 32 and 3 by just splitting numbers. And we've now even found our factor of 3 without even having to go looking for it separate. Now, this is where we stop because we're going to use our strategy of odd and even, and it's going to tell us that 3 is an odd number. So that means there can't be a factor of greater than 32, so we stop here. And so now we've gotten, look how many factors just by doubling and splitting. We've got the 1, the 2, the 48, the 96, the 4, the 24, the 8, the 12, the 6, the 16, the 32, and the 3. Wow, we've nailed a lot of factors. So now since we can't double and split anymore or use an odd and even pattern to go any further, we can now look at the other strategy, which is, does it end in a 0 or a 5 to find the 5 or 10 fact? No, so those are off the table. Is it a double digit like 99? So 11's off the table. So guess what? All we have left to look for are, well, we took 5 off the tables, right, by using the other strategy. We took 11 off the table by using the other strategy, so it's 7 and 9. Those are the only two left to look for. Look how many factors we eliminated just by using our splitting strategy. So if we look at 7 and 9, well, guess what? I'm seeing factors of 6 and 8, so it's telling me very likely there isn't going to be a 7 or 9. But let's start with 9, because 9 times 9 is 81, but we can go with 10 and 11 and 12 facts to get us even closer. So let's do something simple. 9 times 11 is 99, so it shows that we're not going to land on 96. And 9 times 10 is 90, so 9 is off the table. All that we have left to do is look for the 7 fact. Well, I could go 7 times 10. That's using the strategy now. That's the last two, which is going with the greatest factor that I can get to it, that I know of, the greatest factors, which is 7 times 10. Gets me to 70, but I'm still not quite there yet. So I could count by the multiple of 7 up and see if I land on 96. Or I could use 7 times 12, which is 7 times 2 and 7 times 10 combined, and get 84. Now I can count up, which is the last strategy, and say 84 plus 7 is 91, and then one more 7 gets me to 98. So it shows that there is no factor of 7, and we have found all the factors, and most every single one we found was from our doubling and splitting strategy, and we eliminated the rest of them by the other strategies. But look at the power of doubling and splitting. Use this technique, and it's going to save you a lot of time with looking for factors. And continue to practice, and good luck.